name is Steve Guynep, and for about 25 years I've been in VR, and for the past 10 I've been teaching virtual reality classes in Web 3D. And this is my classroom. In the distance you'll see the art my students make. And over here is my friend and fellow teacher, not for this project, but a dear friend, Brian Clevely. Hey, Brian.
Hello.
Brian, where do you teach?
Well, I teach in a program called Virtual Technology and Design, and that is hosted from the University of Idaho here in Moscow, Idaho.
And I have Brian's students in my classes. In fact, I've got one right now, it's Josie, she's awesome. And I want you guys all to know that if you need 3D modeling, you need innovative designers, come back to me and I will hook you up with some of Brian's students because they are great.
Thank you.
All right. So, about this session that you're seeing in my class space. Folks, you notice this doesn't look like a normal classroom? This is what a normal classroom looks like in virtual reality for some reason. The title of this is Designing Innovative Spaces. This is what we're not going to do, but rather we're going to talk about why this is bad and how you guys could be more creative and how to open up some doors to what you're doing and lay down some theory and examples. So if you'll come this way, follow me, Brian. And, well, you know, normally when you see a place like this, you see 2D images in 2D teaching, and we can do that. But, you know, this is virtual reality. So rather than do that, let's get started and drop in a 3D room. So 2D slides. Heck no. But Brian, you're in the wall. You might want to take a little step forward. There you go. All right. So this is the first of my 3D slides. And this is a virtual art gallery for the Dutch Rijksmuseum. And it is a beautiful gallery. It's got pretty little trees, nice little lighting sconces, and it does a nice job of displaying the gallery's artwork, don't you think? I mean, Brian, what do you think of this? Do you like the gallery in general?
Yeah, this is pretty cool. The thing I love about art galleries is while they can be expressive, they're really there to showcase the art. So
wait. Careful. Don't get too far ahead of me.
Backing up.
Beep. You see? This is what happens when you
Yes, it's beautiful, Steve.
bring your teachers in. Yes. But see, my problem with the space...
I tapped the brakes.
Hey, Steve.
Yo.
You do have a question. Someone's asking if Brian is using a VR in a space or is he moving along using controllers?
Neither of us are using VR. We're both on the desktop. It's hard for me to manage both Zoom and a headset, and Brian is on a desktop because he hasn't done this before either. We are in VR chat, by the way, and this is a Unity-based environment. So anyhow, this space, I love it, but my only problem is that this is called the Gallery of the Future. Now, put that question out to the audience. Does anybody think that this is the Gallery of the Future, as pretty as it is? Tammy, anyone? I'm going to guess
A
not.
whole bunch of no's.
I will accept that. No. But this is what everybody does, and it bothers the heck out of me because we have this virtual technology, this place where we can do anything, a place where we can be so digital, and yet this place inside the computer where we can do the most seems to do the least. We live in a world that is becoming more and more virtual, and yet it's not here. And why is that? I mean, can you create reality if you don't understand why you copy it? I mean, that should be fundamental. Can we go forward without understanding the past? Can we be better than we are? How do we get there? How do we actually break through this? So let's look at some lessons from game design. I mean, game design, like VR, right? We've got castles in video games. We've got spaceships in video. Games. And in the middle, we actually have an art museum from City of Heroes. So these are all game spaces. And we think about these spaces. This castle, you can be a knight or a princess or a prince and save a knight or save a princess. You want to wield a sword, you can cross a moat, slay a dragon. The spaceship, it's not even a real spaceship, but you can imagine going off and being a smuggler or a fighter or a traveler. These two things, they want you to suspend your disbelief and place you in an immersive game world. They want you to believe a fiction. And that fiction, that narrative, shapes your interactivity. The narrative immerses you in a world and gets you to believe and shape what you do. The art gallery here, though, this fictional gallery is all about crime and protecting the work or stealing it. But that begs a deeper question about these non-game spaces. And I think this is where Brian was about to go. So Brian, you can cue in just a little bit here, but do art galleries have to look realistic if the art is real? Do classrooms have to look like a classroom if the learning is real? No, that's it.
And that's one of the things that we always play with is what does the space really need to be to support the activity, to support the needs? And that really is kind of the fundamental of design.
And that's what we do here.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to get into.
Right.
So, people treat reality and realism as a goal. And that's just wrong. If the goal isn't to be real, the goal is to get people to feel something or learn something or do something. So what I teach my students and teach Brian's students is that realism and even presence and immersion, they're tools. Tools that we use to create belief and behavior in our users. But that brings up this massive question. It doesn't actually answer what we build. How do you wield it as a tool? And what are the limitations? What's that process of wielding it? And even though this art gallery space could look like anything, even the classroom space could look like anything, there are challenges. So Brian, if you want to follow me around. So this is my avatar. And behind me is Brian's avatar, you already know. Now, when you have a human avatar, it follows that you build a human-sized space. And a human-type space with tables and stuff, or places to sit. There's a whole range of behaviors that get triggered because of the narrative and the story behind just these characters. So when we talk about these spaces, we're not just talking about the architecture. We're talking about our understanding of who we are in these spaces. Now, looking like a human or even a humanoid character makes me want to act like that. If I was a bird, you'd want me to fly. There are tricky things being done. There's an art piece where you are a ghost in a scene, so you're transparent. And think about that. When you're a ghost in a scene, you don't expect to have agency. You're transparent, so you don't stand out. It's a really interesting way to tell a story and have your character move around the scene, but also not necessarily be front and center. Not in the way. The ghost and transparency allows you to negotiate, navigate a narrative under a construct that, naturally explains your visual sense. You can go even further. A friend of mine, Adam Nash, he wanted to do a music concert, so he put this big abstract thing, and he made his audience all a bunch of gray balls. So you're a gray ball with a name on top, and he called us the audient, singular, not plural, singular. And he didn't want you to act like a human being. He wanted to acknowledge the presence of other people, but focus on the music and the audio in this sort of abstract spaces that were around you. And it was a really sort of beautiful experience because that's what you got. So we can build anything. And if we turn around, these are all virtual reality art galleries. People are building everything. People are building a lot of stuff. And, how do we wrap our heads around all of this? How do we wrap our heads around what I just said and go forward? What I tell my students, my interns, is that I want you to look at this panel of examples and think of it in the context of early cinema. The first films, the very beginning, the concept of cinema was very much the idea of virtual reality. They weren't going very deep. I mean, it was simply to capture reality on film. That was it, and that was enough. The primary goals were to, add color, add sound, get better frame rate. Don't have film that catches on fire. Important stuff. I mean, did you know there were patents in, pre-1900 for stereoscopic, aka 3D cinema? People were trying to build virtual immersive movies, before 1900. So cinema really connects. And early cinema, you have these people doing all this work. You had this actualities, which is just copying reality like most people, but you also had the Nickelodeons and the short films. You had people playing around with spectacle. You may have heard this, spectacle. That term also goes back to early cinema with special effects and really zoomed in shots and people playing with different types of colorations. Here in these early works, you can see that. People copying reality, some people trying to create little special effects and bells and whistles. Others, like the the German neo-expressionists or the futurist films. I mean, the futurist filmmakers were trying to create this whole new design language. And I can't, I've only got an hour, but you can dive into their theory, and it sounds a lot like what a lot of artists are talking about today. So the development process of cinema is being remediated. For you fans of Jay Bolter and remediations, the development process is remediating right now in VR. And how do we leverage this? Well, we leverage this through two people, I think, or two groups. Brian, do you remember the Lumiere brothers, the train coming into the station?
I do. Not from first run, but I have seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because if you look as a teacher at the work of the Lumiere brothers, and compare it to what else is going on, all of their work are moving image studies. They're studying visual composition. This train coming into the station in frame and then coming out of frame, big heavy diagonal, and all these little people that will rush out of it. Moving image study. They people leaving the doorway of a factory. I mean, they are studying just like painters did, like Caravaggio and Michelangelo years before, how to compose a 2D scene. The Lumiere brothers did this, how to compose a moving image, because nobody did this before. So there's this sort of underlying new language of composition that we can see being explored in all these works above. They're exploring composition. They're not necessarily getting it right, but they're all seeing what they can do in these spaces. And the other side is a magician named Georges Méliès. And this magician, Méliès, was filming on the streets of Paris, and he had this hearse going by, and his camera jammed. And I know that's hard to believe, that the cutting edge technology of his day, camera, broke down and stopped working, but it did. And of course, back then he could kick it like we do today, and shook it and got it working again. So it stopped while he was filming the hearse, he kicked it, got it working, took the film home, and then he developed it and played it. And he was amazed at what happened. Because at the point where the camera jammed and he was playing it back, it didn't just stop, because it's a piece of film. It just kept going to where the next frame was, where it appeared. And what appeared on the next frame was a carriage of beautiful women. And Méliès was gobsmacked. Magic. And more than that, he saw that it wasn't just a magical transition, but he could edit this film to create new meaning. Edit reality. This is unheard of. This is outside the boundaries of what we understand, or they understood that day, of this notion of editing reality to create new meaning. And we have these two notions, this ability to edit reality and this ability to compose reality. Combined, this is the basis of our coming toolbox for VR. Combined, this is what we need to stress and look for in our own upcoming work. But even then, it's challenging. There was a guy named D.W. Griffith. And Griffith is very famous, probably for being a racist. If you guys know his background, Birth of a Nation was the first movie ever shown in the White House. So it's just kind of sad. But having said that, 150 years after his death, the movie Barack Obama was in the White House, so yeah, kind of good there. Anyhow, editing him, D.W. Griffith was criticized for cutting up his movies. Griffith was like, well, this critic came and said, how are people going to understand what you're doing? All this cuts and stuff. And Griffith replied, well, doesn't Charles Dickens, the best writer of his day, doesn't he do that? And the critic replied, well, yeah, but that's novel writing. That's storytelling. That's different. Griffith replied, these are picture stories. Not so different. When you begin to think that this tool of creating reality, these tools in film towards storytelling and away from reality, that's when the doors open. That's when things flow. You have the basics, but you're still learning. And yet it's obvious. So I have a question for Brian. And Brian, if you can't answer it, let's try the chat. But in the source material for all this, the citation is a story by Charles Dickens, and the first line is "The kettle began it." The kettle began it. First line of Dickens. What kind of film shot does that scream out for? Brian, do you know what kind of, any guesses?
Well, going Dickens, I'm sitting here in a kitchen.
And you're looking at a kettle.
Huge kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what kind of shot? What film shot?
It was an establishing shot.
Okay, maybe. That's kind of good. Tammy, do you have any other answers in the thread?
Jeremiah says close up and zoom out.
Ding! It's a close-up. Because an establishing shot still could be, you're still right, this is the complexity of the language. But even a close-up and then cutting out. It's right there. The kettle began it. It's so obvious, and yet not until you begin to understand all these things. Jump cuts, close-ups, parallel edits, flashbacks, crane shots. This all exists outside of reality and the unreal. This is the language that had to be developed to an audience that wanted it but didn't know how to handle it, and by directors and people that didn't quite understand. They knew they wanted it, but how do you get there? So that's what happened. How do we adapt this to VR? Well, for starters, let's do something that's not possible in real life. Let's just run through the walls. So, Brian, if you want to follow me straight through, we can break some rules. All right. So now there's a couple things to talk about here. And for starters, I want to talk a little bit about this art gallery. This is Chow Fei's R&B City, probably one of the most famous Second Life art pieces ever built. And this is a mashup of an art gallery, a city, and a toy box. And just think about that for a second in terms of, the functionality. I mean, Brian, the idea of Moscow, Idaho, the entire city as an art gallery, I assume that's rather appealing, right?
Oh, totally.
And your college, yeah. And you guys, wherever you are, think about the towns or places you're in, and think about the opportunities to display work. I mean, you have places that are hidden, places that are public, places on rooftops that are dramatic, and places that are seedy and not so good. So big, small, social, not social, all the options you could imagine for sharing and portraying your artwork are in the city.
Steve, someone wants to know what application you're using.
I'm using VR chat to share stuff, but we can talk about that more at the end as well. And this probably will run long, but there's nobody behind us. And, you might think about virtual reality, we're mashing up game design, right? Well, actually, like this process that I'm using right now, this sort of slideshow methodology where I'm dropping in rooms and scenes and stuff, where I'm going back and forth between this and this 3D slideshow. I mean, I'm cutting up reality. I'm editing and breaking things apart. I'm doing what's easy. Just like 150 years ago, like tearing film, most people are focused on big, beautiful worlds. Bigger is better. This simple stuff, what you're seeing right now and how we present, has so much value. And you don't get credit for it because it just works, which is kind of sad. In fact, even this scene right here, there are interesting triggers on behavior that to talk about. I mean, Brian, years ago, you and I had a conversation about chairs. I mean, why do you put chairs in the scene?
You want my full answer?
No, briefest answer, if you remember what you told me, 10 years ago.
So people will sit them and they stop twitching around.
Yes! People twitch, and my students twitch if you lock them in, and it sucks, because people have energy. And as a teacher, as an artist, in general, you want people to express that energy toward your goal. You don't want to lock them down. Kills me. So here, you see I've got little pictures and vignettes. And I can actually walk over and look at one of these vignettes and basically, imply if Brian was a little more comfortable with his movement, bring him over. So this scene isn't just simply, one image with a bunch of small ones. This scene is an invitation for people to turn and explore and use some of their own minor exploration effort. Behavior is being triggered. This ring, guess what? I'm walking on nothing right now. Because you know what? I don't want people to fall and die in my classroom. I mean, there are sometimes we borrow from games and sometimes we don't. But look, this little ledge, people know that you generally fall off of things. So this ring becomes the kind of perfect setting point in lieu of a chair to see this screen full size. And if you've ever done VR and seen a big screen, you look up. And it's obnoxious to see a big screen. Or you look through people. I'm actually, cutting off the floor lets you do interesting things. So there's lots of hidden benefits that emerge when you begin to edit reality and just mash things up. Art galleries are a wonderful way to deal with that. Because art galleries themselves, art galleries are social interfaces. White walls that hold information and arrange it. They're like a little, three-dimensional database that presents and curates and archives data. They are wonderful places to study. They're somewhat abstract and clean, and some gallery people would rather you have more context and more going on. But for us, art galleries are a mashup of art, and art galleries face an interface today. And as we go forward in this, we're going to talk more about the functionality and pull functionality out of art galleries and how they present, curate, and archive information. And on some levels, we'll get to teaching, and some levels will go on. And I'm sorry if this isn't as educational, but this is for my students and as designers. So let's continue. All right, next question that I've got for you folks. This is, on the left, 3 images from Zaha Hadid's VBAM. Zaha Hadid had a physical gallery space, and the folks in Michigan made it a virtual gallery. So they took a physical space, physical art gallery, and just copied it for VR. I have a trick question. Tammy, if you want to, we'll go with Brian and the audience both. How many works of art does this gallery hold? Audience and Brian. Brian, you want to go first?
1.
1. Okay. First of all, I told Brian, how's the audience? Any other guesses?
4.
4. Okay. Well, the answer is 1. And the answer is 1 because virtual reality artists, when they're given like infinite space to do stuff, they use up infinite space, particularly if it's free. And they had a famous professor who was a VR artist, and he was going to put his work in this. And so he had these existing pieces, but none of them fit. And this is funny because what they had to do for VBAM, see these links? This is a gallery holding a work called Proxy, which is what you see here. You click this link for FlitterGet, and that's a whole other copy of this gallery space. Exact same Zaha Hadid work that holds a different artwork. Survey goes to a survey questions. And then Confluence is yet another artwork by the Michigan State folks. So 3 links, 3 art galleries, an entire art gallery that holds one piece of work. Crazy. But confronting that challenge of how do you hold infinite work, well, it makes you do silly things, particularly when you have somebody like Zaha Hadid to start with. So this question about functionality, what can we build in the challenges? What can we make and how do we handle functionality? Well, that's what we're getting into right now. These links remind me of these portals. In fact, I don't personally see any difference between these portals and those URLs. They take you to different worlds, they teleport you, they make you kind of leave that page. And they break up the site in a way that kind of makes it less whole, feeling like complete and whole. And it raises kinds of questions and problems for me. I don't necessarily think it's wrong, but as a social interface and that desire to keep people connected and have them bump into each other, I want the space not to break off and just automatically link to other worlds. There are galleries that have paintings, and you click on the painting and you enter the painting, and that's nice. It has value, but in some ways it's kind of a cop-out. So how do we not copy reality and come up with a solution for that? Well, let's keep going. Now this is a art gallery by Alternate Fabrique back in 2000. The year 2000. This was the Best in Show for the SIGGRAPH Web 3D Art Festival. And this is a beautiful art space as far as I'm concerned. I learned a lot from it. And first of all, in contrast to our opening gallery, there are no shrubs, there are no lighting fixtures, there are no benches. There are stairs, and curiously, the stairs are rendered in wireframe, which might go a little bit too far, but you know what? It's an art gallery. And the creativity that the narrative of an art gallery affords, lets you do these interesting things. Now, as a designer, this space was a real breakthrough for me. Because if you don't have plants and chairs and sconces, and you have a cube, your space just looks empty. You want to fill it with reality. What this space taught me how to do was to break up my geometry. How do I create depth and volume and detail without necessarily adding realistic objects? So for those of you modeling and creating spaces, if you start with a rectangle box, you're already down. You're already headed down a path that isn't going to help you. These guys go a lot further than you might, but it's virtual reality. And what works and what will work in the future and will become is up for grabs. I mean, they add elements, decorative elements that are abstract to do that sort of vibe of a horizontal and art sort of abstract space. I mean, you can see paintings and images being hung here and done. So yeah, this is a creative space. But does it hold artwork? And the answer is no. See, I was one of the artists on the team here, and they gave us that little space in the distance. And technically that was about the size of a mobile home. So the whole like, hey, we're artists, we like to be infinite, and we're dealing with a mobile home size space. Well, it did kind of piss us off. Even though we only had 87K and 14 4K modems. I mean, yeah, I had 87K including textures to work with. So, hey, please don't complain about anything in terms of virtual reality today, because you really shouldn't. But in spite of that limitations, yeah, we wanted more space. And my friend and Arts Electronica winner, Andy Best, and actually employer when I worked in Finland, he's like, oh, you're going to give me a tiny space? So he put this giant baby monster in. And he's like, screw you guys. If you give me as an artist this tiny little space, I'm going to make my audience deal with a tiny space. So you enter this, and this is what you face at the start. And you have to navigate around the tightness of this baby. So, this is just hysterical. Pushing against it. The other image next to it is my space. And I just put a red button in. And that red button, that rebellion, flickered out their gallery and put my Zen koi pond, kind of colder, like spinning up mobile space. So kind of kinetic art. And the thing is, it was an unshared behavior or not network behavior. So only people who pushed my button saw this. Everybody else was still in the gallery. What that means, of course, is that some people were in my reality and other people's were in a different reality. And yet they still saw each other and had to interact with each other. And my original idea was I wanted to do all these random religions and have people like see different religions and not know they were seeing different religions, seeing different realities. But I couldn't get that far because it was about 87K. And the crazy thing is today we have people right now living in different realities and trying to relate. So you don't apparently need even virtual reality to do that. But interesting, I think as educators, a little tangent, you can begin to see creative stuff coming off of this. We'll talk more about the educational side of this in tangents in a little bit. Because right now I want to talk about one more idea. And this was a work by a friend of mine, Cristiano Bianchi. He's an architect, a really brilliant guy. And he put a box into this space. And you put your head in the box. And it's interesting because, That doesn't sound like very much. But question for Brian and our studio audience. How do you judge scale? How do you judge distance in an abstract space?
That's a really good question. I look for things like perspective, but I also look for things that I can relate to given scale.
Okay. First of all, thank you. That's the first one you've missed. Anyone from our home players?
Happy
No.
to.
Not so far. I think Brian scared him off.
Brian. All right. Well, what am I doing right now? I am moving through the space. How fast you move gives you a sense of scale in the abstract. So, what my friend Cristiano did in this little box space, you put your head in the box, and he slows your avatar down to just 10% of your original speed. Now, this is the height of your eye, so suddenly you're moving slower. You're still turning at the same rate, but you're moving physically slower. This space feels big. And you'll notice there's a other little box in there. You put your head in that little box, your eyes go into that box, and he slows you down to another, 1%. And he had that infinitely laid out, where you just are going slower and slower in space. But because your world, the scale of your world, shrinks with you, you don't notice. And anybody who's done 3D modeling, when you zoom in and out of a 3D model, you kind of sense, oh yeah, that actually does work for how you manage scale. So he actually built an infinitely large space just by slowing people down. The crazier thing, even this, is that in these early spaces, when you got close to people, they would fade out because they were polite. Like I get personal space. In early spaces, they would make you disappear. So you could get close to the box. You wouldn't see other people in there. Their avatars would fade out. So from the outside, you would see these people with their head in the box, turning and spinning in another reality, but standing still. Just really freakishly cool. So again, how do we create an edit reality? Well, let's just leverage art and rebellion. All right, another mashup. This is the virtual Guggenheim. And I'm going to just say, for anybody who knows of the virtual Guggenheim, call it out in the threads and give yourself a pat on the back. Because this was never built, but this was a design by another work by Zaha Hadid. And this was an experiment in shape-shifting architecture. This whole space, and I'm sorry the image isn't better, but all those little images down there are all the phases that this thing went through. So, talking about rebellion, this is Zaha Hadid rebelling against physical space. And on the surface, that's both amazingly cool, and yet functionality doesn't really help you. And the answer really is not the shape-shifting, but other things do. And actually, before I get into the shape-shifting, does anybody have a notion on what this is a mashup of? This is, the other gallery, Chow Fei's was a city and a toy box with a gallery. Any guesses on what mashup this gallery is?
Nothing yet.
All right. Well, this is a tricky one. This is a mashup, of a body. Because I want you to look at these tubes as veins and arteries. And those little rooms are cells that flow through it. So, again, this is sort of an organic exploration of work, of not just a rebellion against physical space, but a combining of the human body, a body, more or less, but a human body in some sense, and an architectural building. So that's where the narrative mashup begins. But in terms of functionality, each one of these rooms is separate. So each one of these rooms could hold an infinitely large piece. I mean, each one of these could hold an entire art gallery's worth of work or one painting, because they're all separate realities. Much like these other discussions we've had just earlier, we've seen how this could be done. But it's interesting to me that the act of curation comes into play, because they're also sequential. You leap one to one to one. So there is a sort of narrative path that you can travel through that I, as a curator, or as you as a teacher, can control. So it has this crazy beginning, this piece, and yet it has this really interesting outcome for curation and holding infinitely large works and types of work. Again, keeping an open mind, following where these narratives take you, and then trying to test out what functionalities emerge. It's just useful. And again, this is an art gallery. Now, if I was to say this was an office space, you'd think I was crazy. But as an art gallery, you immediately accept it. There are creative spaces. Art galleries is one, and classrooms, more so than they are one too. We really need more creative classrooms. Sorry, a little sidetrack. Holding work, Bryn O, another famous artist from Second Life. This is her art gallery, her retrospective. And what she does is she takes her work, her physical, an art gallery, she takes her work and lays it out on a timeline. Now, art galleries do this already, where they run through the history of bodies of work when you start at the beginning and you end at the later dates. They tell a story through that linear narrative progression. She does that too, but these are not, there is no building holding her work. There's her work that became the building. And she put in a path between these works. A path that is both a timeline, and from game design, it's a critical path. Since you're a game audience, I'm assuming most of you know what a critical path is. It's the main path that carries you through space. But it's also a path that you can put meaning into. Are you going up? Are you going down? Are you going around a corner and be surprised? There are gentle lessons of embedding meaning into the space and into your journey. And she does that intuitively. I mean, all of her work does this, all these artworks do this, lead her around and create mood and emotion. By default, her travel through the journey itself, the way it's laid out, is a part of her personal journey and an expression of her journey. That's just kind of neat. And as you begin to create your own educational virtual spaces, the notion of how you lay things out as a journey should be, well, should be happening whether I'm telling you about it now or not. So let's get crazy. Now, Brian, you guys had a virtual work on the Civil War. Can you tell our audience briefly, under a minute or two, what that project was like?
The project was intended to, it was a history class, and the intent really was to don't read about history, but be a part of it, live it, experience it. And that's really what we were focusing on.
Well, how was it laid out?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to remember, because it's been sunsetted for a number of years.
But weren't there two spaces and a train?
Yes. Yeah. And like I say, it's been a while. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. I'm putting Brian on the spot because this project really appealed to me. They had two spaces on the Civil War, one north and one south, and they put students, one group in one room, and one group in one, well, not a room, but one environment, and they put another group in another environment, one north and one south, and they explored and got knowledge, data, those perspectives. And then they went to Washington, D.C., and there was a conference or congress where they met, and they debated the start of the Civil War, more or less, those
Yes.
early things.
Now I remember it. Thank you. Yes.
So here,
You're right.
yeah.
We did that.
Yes, you did. You guys, like I said, you guys were brilliant. And you guys out there, I wasn't kidding when I said you should hire his students. Look, how we set up data and narrative, what they see first, what they don't see first, shapes your understanding and opinions. Setting up in two areas shapes debates. I did the same thing here. This is timeline, and this is one world with two spawn points, a spawn point in the 1950s and a spawn point in the 1970s. And it was random. People would come in from one side or the other, and they would get, the 1950s, communism, Cold War, into World War II, prosperity. Otherwise, they'd get drugs and disco and rebellion and hedonism. And you had two initial perspectives that were very different, and then they met to discuss the 1960s. I didn't experiment with this as much as I should have, but again, setting up spaces, setting up the information to display, because these are all like little installations, little art installations on a timeline, just like you saw with Purnell. But for me, one end and one end meet in the middle and talk. You can spin these concepts into really unique educational experiences. I tried exploring Venn diagrams as spaces, extruding Venn diagrams. A Venn diagram, you have the circles, they overlap. I mean, people try to do these data spaces and charts and graphs that kind of suck. But I began building spaces that were based on diagrams. And one of the things I thought was really cool, in this space down here, there's a heads-up display, a little mini-map. And the mini-map shows where you are in the timeline. So you have this image of a timeline, or in the other one, the image of the Venn diagram, that situates you in the knowledge or the space itself in the abstract, what we think of as a diagram. But all around you, you see the contextual information. So how we overlap information. Huge educational possibilities for stuff. Another option, Jesus, I mean, it just keeps going, right? My friend Cristiano Bianchi again. This is another gallery idea. I'm assuming most of the people here remember the Sex Pistols. Again, give yourself points for remembering the band and how many members it had. Because this space here on top, on one axis, is years that the band existed. And on the other axis are band members. So you've got these two axes, years and band members. And every single checkerboard, every single square was dedicated to one person in 1 year. And as you walk through his gallery space, that one checkerboard materializes with information. So you're in a materialized space where you're standing. All the other cubes that you're not standing on are just, not there, kind of just grayed out. And yet there's also a little row of stuff on the rows you're on. So you get a little detail on the year you're on. You get a little detail about the other band members at the same time. So you're fixed in space. Big detail, artist and band member and year, and then more about that person's lifespan on front and back, and then other angle what the other band members are up to. A really neat way to present information almost in a library database. It was really cool. It went far. He began exploring actually the Z or the Y direction. He was adding stairs, and then he just went too far because artists do that. I mean, again, I said at the beginning, artists kind of, they rebel and they do things crazy. More points for you if you remember Marcos Novak and Liquid Architectures. And thank you, Brian, for reminding me of this guy early on. I know people who hate Marcos Novak, Liquid Architecture, because it went too far, it was kind of crazy. And on some levels, it's true. I like Marcos. These are data-driven spaces. So these are equations and functions and kind of immersive data. But how do you read this? And even Marcos didn't know. But there's a curious notion about what is a data space. Because I can go outside right now, and if a tree falls down, I can actually see how old it was by the rings. Data is embedded in our environment. Hell, I can tell right now what time of day it is just about by the angle of the sun. What a great timepiece in the world. I know the seasons more or less by the color of the leaves. If I was 100 years ago, I could probably navigate by the stars. And think about that, the way the world looks to indigenous people. I mean, indigenous people see the natural environment as a data space. They understand the connection of data just being forced on them in big ways. So this notion of data around us isn't quite so foreign. I think we lose track of it just because we're surrounded by data and we don't want so much that we impose it. So yeah, lots of interesting ideas. I'm going to take a pause for questions and then kind of go on for a little bit longer. So just as a courtesy moment, Brian, do you have any questions or just comments so far?
No questions at this point. I mean, everything's been absolutely brilliant. I love, that you're taking us through and breaking down what seems to be quite complex, but you're breaking it down into digestible pieces and kind of making the invisible visible in many ways. And so for that, I'm appreciative, and you're using people's work from across many different platforms, which I think is really important, because the platform is a vehicle for sharing, not a destination. And that's what I'm really intrigued with, is the idea that all of this can be manifested in all these different kinds of platforms and connect up with different groups of people. So yeah, brilliant.
Well, thank you for that. And I mean, the university I'm at right now, Miami University, they have a slogan of love and honor. And I love this medium. I love exploring. I love my friends and my history here. And this presentation, these are mostly people I know. I mean, I don't know Zaha Hadid, I don't know Chow Fei, but I met up with Bryn and everyone else, are great people. So this entire project is a desire to, honor their work and their memory and their efforts, because there's 30 years worth of work and nobody touches it. 30 years worth of work, and we keep reinventing the wheel. We're so wrapped up in our own personal excitement that we forget what's been done. And it's embarrassing that we live in a world of information, and yet all you get if you search today is top 10 best as a source point for anything. We need to do better than that. And yeah, I'm going to stop and actually go on to Tammy. Tammy, any questions from our studio audience?
No, but if anybody wants to raise your hand, then I can unmute you and you can ask a question. Some of the comments in the chat, let's see. Film created a language. We need a new one for virtual spaces.
Ding, ding, ding. Oh, I'm going to get to that, by the way. I'm going to get to that. More fun stuff coming. Keep going. Anything else we need to cover? I'll tell you what. I'm going to do a little rant, and you guys can type in the questions or while I'm ranting, because one of the things I say at this point, because I've been going against reality a lot, but you shouldn't, because reality is beautiful. And I mean, Brian, what is it a sunny day where you are right now?
Just looking outside, it's absolutely gorgeous.
All right, I can't imagine a better background color than light blue. I mean, seriously, as a designer, light blue, what we see in the sky, I wake up and see, that's just awesome. And I've built lots of worlds, and I haven't come up with a better color. And I think about it like this, like we have a yellow sun. So you don't want warm on warm. I mean, that would be oppressive, right? It'd be feeling hot all the time. But a warm sun, warm light on a cool color, that's refreshing. That gives energy without being overpowering. And this blue, I mean, it's light blue. I mean, you've been in dark rooms, you've been out at night, it's oppressive, it's closed off. This blue is light, it's open, it's expansive. It, it feels like you can go out forever. It's just right, but it's just dark enough. I mean, it's just dark enough that we can put these huge objects right above us. Objects of the size of cities, objects the size of states, of countries, float above our heads. And they're called clouds. And they're white and fluffy. And the white clouds work on this slight, just dark enough blue background. Fluffy and bright. I mean, and you know what I'm saying is true because you've seen dark clouds. And you feel bad about dark clouds. And maybe there's some psychology going on, but just roll with me, because I'm going to go even further. You'll notice that the sky isn't just a flat color. It's a gradient. It's darker. It's darker because it's actually closer to space up above us. So we see the darkness of space ahead. And then as we look into the distance, we see more of the true color of air, getting lighter and lighter as it goes. And it's interesting because this gradation, it's subtle enough to give a sense of depth, right? I mean, it's a little bit of detail. It gives you a little information in the abstract to let you know there's volume. But it's not enough to come forward. I mean, it's not like a shiny sky would just really freak us out. So it's subtle. And as a game designer, look at the distance. It gets brighter in the distance, but it also gets grayer. Fuzzy and hazy. Uses saturation and detail. Now in video game design, if you want somebody to go someplace, Brian, you can answer this. Brian, what do you put in the distance if you want somebody to go someplace? You want somebody to...
I'll put something that is unique, that stands out, that looks a little bit different, and it becomes a focal point that you kind of work towards.
Yeah, typically something bright and shiny. You head toward the brightness.
Sure, yeah.
So, brightness. And it's also gray and hazy, so we get mystery. Our world, this horizon, is an inviting mystery that beckons us to go explore it. As a game designer, our world is wonderfully formed. I'm not going to get, believe in God or not, I'm not talking about intelligent design, but it's just brilliant the way our world is. So I'm not necessarily saying we need to be more abstract or not, but we can learn wonderful lessons from this. And the way that our horizon calls to us as a designer, literally calls to us, is absolutely brilliant. So we want more of that. And I'm going to dive into my space a little bit. Tammy, were any questions popped up?
No additional questions.
Okay. Here's my art gallery. And it's kind of comic looking. It's kind of a compromise because this was an art gallery and a class space. So there's a moodiness and a kind of a high pull away thing you get with an art gallery. But I had to be kind of joyful and comic, I think, for my students. So this is my space, but I think it's the color is a little bit off for an art gallery, but it's a compromise. And you'll notice that in my space, I have a critical path that loops around. And it's interesting for me that in my art gallery, in video games, you don't have dead ends. And I don't like dead ends in my physical architecture either. Now, in some spaces, in some video games, you jump down to kind of, either block a behavior so you can't go back, or you jump down to loop back to the beginning. If you play World of Warcraft, you see this a lot in their architecture where they build spaces, and at the end you just kind of jump down and go on your way. So traveling through the space, looping around, but also, using gravity and falling as a travel element, I think helps people. Because travel and motion gives you a sense of place gives you, purpose to some of your fidgeting. But, travel when you want to. Travel when you need to. Don't travel when you don't want to. Teleporting people can work. But, again, why not edit reality and do what I'm doing now? See those little rings? Those little half circles at the ends of each of these? Those are presentation spaces where I archive past work. So this presentation ability that I'm doing right now for you is also a function in my art gallery to archive things. So people can actually click and see a whole bunch of work instead of having to teleport everywhere. Again, 3D slideshows, why not? This is what my interior looks like. And again, you can walk out if you want, Brian. It's a little bit weird for people when you notice you don't have a floor. But Brian, just you're here for the first time. How does the lack of floor bother you much? You don't even think about it if I'm talking about it, you and here in front of you.
Gotta push the button. No, I get a sense of up and down through other elements, and floor is one way to do that. Wall, ceiling, all these architectural elements that you have in here provide me the sense of direction, so I don't feel uneasy.
Well, a couple things. When I was building this space, you know how art galleries have partitions, and those partitions are always on a flat plane? Well, I'm like, screw that. I want partitions in all directions, because I don't know what the hell I'm holding. I mean, when you have to deal with infinite work, you better be flexible. And I've got other installations that make use of this, where we go down and up and do things. So, this lack of floor has a real functional purpose. But in terms of the language and the design subtlety that you don't think is there, you'll notice that the top and bottom are mirrored with a little crease in the middle. And that crease alone is a subtle cue of your ground plane. I've built spaces where the top and bottom were very different, and it was too much information. It was distracting. It was awkward to deal with. But curiously, the mirror let me, take away the floor and still give a sense of comfort. And I mirrored the top and bottom, and then I actually, these are just simple extrusions, and then I grabbed sloths of polygons and I dragged left or right. So you'll see the edge coming out here and being pushed in over here. So there are subtle patterns that pick up and feel more normal than you know. I mean, when things work, they just work.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah.
It is wrapping up time, and I know some people do need to log off. So did you want to just make a quick closing comment before I stop the recording and maybe tell folks how to reach you if they have a question or?
Oh yeah, well, a couple things. The whole language thing. These icons right here, where you go out. This is immersive language. This is a world of signs and symbols. Your character is not a character per se; it's a symbol of a character. Walls and stuff. So symbolic interaction. These are giant exclamation points. I wanted people to know where the exits were and how to move around the space and see them. And I'm just like, well, screw it. I'm going to use contrast, but I'm also going to use a giant exclamation point and literally drop symbols in your faces. So that's where I want to close with those ideas. My name is Steve Guynup. My work is Isovista, and you click this link. So, Guynup, there's not many of us. You can Google, look around, find my site. But definitely find me. I'm happy to do this for your own students or your own teams. If you have work to share with my students, my interns, let me know. I'm here to share and help. Thank you for coming.